What happens when Hollywood's most straight-talking actor comes face-to-face with daytime television's most controversial host? You're about to witness one of the most explosive moments ever captured on live television. Confrontation. So intense, so uncomfortable, that it reportedly pushed producers to the edge and forced security to stay on alert. Before we dive into this story, make sure you hit the subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about celebrities walking out of interviews. Is it a powerful stand or an overreaction? Now, let's get into what really happened when Mark Wahlberg stepped directly into the lion's den. The studio lights burned brightly over the familiar set of The View, casting that unmistakable daytime TV glow that millions of viewers recognize instantly. As the theme music faded, Wahlberg settled into his chair, casually adjusting the sleeves of his button-down shirt. His posture was relaxed, but not careless alert, composed, and clearly professional. This was far from his first media appearance. Over the years, he had navigated hundreds of interviews, from red carpet junkets to late-night talk shows, promoting everything from high-octane action blockbusters to emotionally complex dramas that showcased his evolution as an actor. On paper, this appearance was supposed to be routine. Wahlberg was there to promote his latest film, a gritty crime drama centered on a reformed criminal struggling to make peace with a violent past. The role had already drawn praise for its emotional depth, and the press tour was meant to highlight redemption, personal growth, and the power of second chances. Nothing controversial, nothing risky. At least, that's how it was supposed to. Sitting across from him was Joy Behar, a veteran of daytime television known as much for her sharp tongue as her unapologetic opinions, as she shuffled through her stack of note cards. A familiar smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth, an expression long-time viewers had learned to recognize as a warning sign. This wasn't going to be a soft interview. Behar didn't do soft. She thrived on confrontation, on pushing buttons, on steering conversations into uncomfortable territory. The other co-hosts exchanged subtle glances, the kind that happen when people sense trouble brewing but aren't quite sure how far it will go. There was a tension in the air that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't loud or obvious, no raised voices yet, no visible conflict, but it was there, hanging over the set like static before a storm. Even the audience seemed to feel it, mostly composed of royal, middle-aged fans of the show. They settled into their seats expecting the usual blend of celebrity small talk, light humour, and promotional sound bites. What they didn't know was that they were about to witness something very different. So, Mark, Joy began, leaning forward slightly, her eyes narrowing with a predatory gleam that cameras didn't miss. You've played a lot of tough guys over the years. Her tone was casual, almost playful, but there was an edge underneath it, the kind of edge that suggested this question was going somewhere more pointed, more personal. Wahlberg nodded politely, offering a measured smile. He had been trained by years in the spotlight to stay calm, to listen before reacting. That's true, he replied evenly. I'm drawn to characters who are flawed, who are trying to figure things out. Joy tilted her head, tapping one of her note cards against the table. Some people say you're not just playing those characters, she continued. They say you are those characters. Violent pasts, anger issues, controversy, it's all part of your real-life story too, isn't it? The shift in the room was immediate. A murmur rippled through the audience. The co-host stiffened. This wasn't a question about the movie anymore. This was personal. Wahlberg's smile tightened, just slightly. He didn't interrupt her, didn't raise his voice. Instead, he took a breath. The kind someone takes when deciding whether to deflect or confront. I've never hidden my past, he said calmly. But I've also worked very hard to grow beyond it. That's kind of the point of the film. Joy wasn't satisfied. She pressed on, her voice sharpening. But don't you think it's convenient to profit from redemption stories when real people don't get that luxury? The tension was now unmistakable. The studio felt smaller, heavier. Cameras zoomed in, catching every flicker of expression on Wahlberg's face, the tightening jaw, the focused eyes. This was no longer a promotional interview. It was a challenge, broadcast live, with nowhere to hide. What followed would spark debate online for days. Was Joy Behar holding a celebrity accountable, or deliberately provoking him for ratings? Was Wahlberg being defensive, or was he right to push back? And at what point does an interview cross the line from tough questioning into outright ambush? As the exchange continued, voices grew firmer, pauses longer, and the polite veneer of daytime television began to crack. What started as a simple conversation about a movie was quickly turning into something far more volatile, a clash of values, perspectives, and egos, playing out in front of a live audience. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something was about to go wrong. Behind their heavy broadcast equipment, normally invisible and unfazed, a few of them subtly shifted their footing, their shoulders tightening as if bracing for impact. Years of live television had trained them to recognize the signs the moment when a conversation stops being an interview and starts becoming a confrontation. This was one of those moments. Seated under the harsh studio lights of The View, Mark Wahlberg went completely still. The warmth that had been present in his expression just minutes earlier vanished. His jaw locked, his eyes hardened. His hands slowly curled around the arms of his chair, gripping them with deliberate restraint. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't gesturing, but the shift in his body language spoke volumes. This was no longer a man enjoying a casual daytime appearance. This was someone being pushed into a corner across the table. The other co-hosts looked visibly uncomfortable. One glanced down at her notes, suddenly very interested in the paper in front of her. Another forced a tight smile that failed to hide her unease. They all knew it. Everyone in that room knew it. Joy Behar had crossed a line one that daytime. Television rarely dared to cross so directly. This wasn't sharp humour anymore. This wasn't debate. This was personal. "Excuse me," Mark said quietly. The word landed heavier than a shout ever could. His voice was low, controlled, and unmistakably dangerous, not because it was angry, but because it was restrained. It was the tone of someone who had reached the end of his patience and was deciding, in real time, how far he was willing to go. For a brief moment, it seemed like Joy might take the hint, like she might pause, recalibrate, or soften her approach, but instead she leaned forward, apparently oblivious or indifferent to every warning sign flashing in front of her. "I'm just saying," Joy continued, her voice firm, almost smug. "It's interesting how Hollywood allows certain people to reinvent themselves while others get cancelled for much less." The audience shifted in their seats. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, quickly dying out when it became clear this wasn't a joke. "What makes you so special?" Joy pressed on, emphasizing the word that you get to just forget about your past and move on. The implication hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. It wasn't framed as curiosity. It wasn't framed as concern. It was an accusation. Mark straightened in his chair. His grip loosened, not because he was calming down, but because he was preparing to speak. "I have never forgotten about my past," he said, his voice rising now, the restraint beginning to crack. "Not for a single day." The studio fell silent. "I've talked openly about my mistakes," he continued, each word measured but increasingly forceful. "I've owned them. I've taken responsibility for them. I've worked to make amends in ways that don't make headlines, and I've spent years trying to be a better person than I was." His eyes never left Joy's. "So tell me," Mark said, leaning forward slightly now, his patience clearly exhausted, "what exactly are you trying to accomplish here?" The question wasn't rhetorical. It was direct, challenging, and it put the ball squarely back in Joy's court. "I'm trying to have an honest conversation about accountability," Joy shot back without hesitation. Something that seems to be in very short supply these days, especially among privileged white men in Hollywood. The reaction was immediate. A sharp inhale echoed from somewhere in the audience. One co-host's eyes widened, another subtly shook her head, as if silently pleading for the conversation to stop before it went any further. The phrase had landed like a match tossed onto gasoline. Mark blinked once. Slowly, there it was. The moment the conversation stopped pretending to be about accountability and revealed itself for what it had become, a public reckoning, framed through identity, privilege, and moral authority. Played out under studio lights for millions of viewers at home. "You don't know me," Mark said finally, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "You don't know the work I've done. You don't know the people I've apologized to privately, or the changes I've made when no one was watching." Joy tried to interject, but Mark didn't stop. "And I'm not standing here asking for forgiveness," he added. "I'm asking for fairness. There's a difference." The tension was now unbearable. This wasn't daytime television anymore. It was a raw, unfiltered clash of perspectives, values, and lived experiences. The audience wasn't applauding. They weren't booing. They were frozen, caught between discomfort and disbelief. Producers, backstage were already whispering into headsets. Camera angles tightened. The energy in the room felt volatile, like a wire pulled too tight and threatening to snap at any second. This was no longer about a movie. It wasn't even about Mark Wahlberg's past. It was about who gets to define redemption, who gets to decide when accountability ends, and whether live television was the right battlefield for that fight. And as the seconds stretched on, one thing became painfully clear: this interview was spiralling fast. And there was no easy way out. The calm in Mark's voice somehow made the moment even more intimidating. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't posturing. That restrained the quiet. Deliberate control was far more unsettling than any outburst could have been. Real journalism. Mark Wahlberg said slowly, his eyes locked on Joy. "Is that what you call this?" He let the question hang in the air for a beat before continuing, ambushing someone who came here in good faith to talk about their work. "Is that journalism now?" A ripple of unease moved through the studio. "You're not a journalist, Joy." Mark went on, his voice sharpening with every word. "You're a bully with a platform, and you use that platform to tear people down because it makes you feel important." The silence that followed was absolute. The audience didn't clap. They didn't gasp. They barely even breathed. Hundreds of people sat frozen, watching what felt less like an interview and more like a slow-motion train wreck. A few audience members discreetly raised their phones, instinctively recording what they could already sense was about to explode across social media. This wasn't just uncomfortable anymore, it was historic. At the table, the other co-hosts of The View looked completely paralysed. One stared straight ahead, lips pressed together. Another shifted in her seat, hands folded tightly in her lap. No one seemed willing or brave enough to step in. Everyone knew this confrontation had crossed the point of no return. Across from Mark, Joy Behar flushed a deep red, anger rising visibly in her face. "How dare you call me a bully?" Joy snapped, her voice trembling with fury. "I'm holding you accountable for your past, something that apparently nobody else in Hollywood has the backbone to do." Her words came fast now, sharp and unfiltered. "You walked in here expecting US to just fall all over your latest movie," she continued, gesturing dismissively, while ignoring the elephant in the room. "The elephant in the room," Mark repeated. He let out a short, bitter laugh, not amused, not light, but hollow. "The elephant in the room," he said, shaking his head. "Is that you're so desperate for ratings and attention that you're willing to destroy someone's reputation on live television just to get people talking?" A low murmur rippled through the audience. "You don't care about accountability," Mark pressed on. "You don't care about justice, and you certainly don't care about growth or change. You care about yourself, about your ego, about winning the moment." Joy didn't hesitate. "That's rich," she fired back, leaning forward, eyes blazing. Coming from someone who built their entire career playing tough guys because they can't escape their own violent past, the words hit like a slap. Gasps erupted across the studio, sharp and involuntary. Even the camera operators, veterans, who had filmed everything from celebrity meltdowns to political shouting matches, visibly recoiled. One cameraman instinctively pulled back his rig, as if physically distancing himself from the venom in her words. Joy wasn't done. "Tell me, Mark," she continued coldly, "when you're on set pretending to be some hero, do you ever think about the people you hurt? Or is it easier to pretend that was someone else?" The room felt like it collapsed inward. Mark's face drained of colour completely. For a split second, it looked like he might actually lose control, not explode in anger, but break under the weight of it all. His chest rose slowly. He swallowed hard. His eyes flickered downward, then back up. The tension was unbearable. "You know what?" Mark said quietly. His voice was so low that the microphones barely caught it, forcing the audience to lean in. "You're right about one thing." Joy stilled. "I did hurt people when I was young." Mark continued, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "And I've spent every single day since then trying to make up for it. Not for cameras, not for applause, but because it was the right thing to do." He paused. "But you," he said, looking directly at Joy now, "you hurt people right now. Today, on live television." The words landed with devastating clarity. "And you act like you're doing the world a service," Mark added. "Like cruelty becomes virtue if you dress it up as accountability." No one spoke. The audience sat in stunned silence. The co-hosts didn't move. Somewhere off camera, a producer's voice crackled urgently through a headset. This was no longer salvageable. Whatever was supposed to happen next? Commercial break. Topic change. Forced laughter, it was too late. This wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was a collision between two completely different ideas of morality, one rooted in punishment, the other in redemption. And for the first time that morning, it became painfully clear that this interview wasn't going to end the way anyone expected. The words tore out of Joy Behar in a near shriek, her voice climbing several octaves as anger finally overwhelmed restraint. Gone was the practiced composure of a veteran talk show host. What remained was raw fury, barely contained, spilling, out in front of millions. I'm not the one with a criminal record, Joy continued, her finger jabbing the air for emphasis. I'm not the one who committed hate crimes. I'm not the one pretending to be something I'm not. Each accusation landed like a hammer blow. No, she snapped, her voice dripping with contempt. You're just someone who attacks people for entertainment. The audience froze. This wasn't pointed questioning anymore. This was character assassination, delivered live, with no safety net. A collective tension rippled through the studio, sharp, electric, suffocating. Several audience members covered their mouths. Others leaned forward, eyes wide, unable to look away. Phones were now fully raised, recording without shame. Everyone knew this moment would not be forgotten. Across the table, Mark Wahlberg didn't react the way many expected. He didn't shout. He didn't slam the table. Instead, something remarkable happened. His composure returned. Not something colder. The anger that had been burning moments earlier seemed to harden, crystallizing into a focused, controlled fury that was somehow even more intimidating. He straightened in his chair, his expression settling into a mask of quiet resolve. When he spoke, his voice was steady, measured, and razor-sharp. You sit behind that desk, Mark said slowly, and you judge everyone else. He gestured subtly toward the table separating them. You judge their lives, their mistakes, their worst moments, and you do it from a place of total safety. Joy scoffed, but Mark continued, unshaken, and while you're doing that, he said, you contribute nothing positive to the world. No solutions, no growth, just condemnation. The words hit harder because they weren't shouted. At least when I made mistakes, Mark went on, his voice tightening just slightly. I was a kid who didn't know better. A kid who came from a place of anger and ignorance. He leaned forward now, eyes locked on Joy. You, he said quietly, are a grown woman, and you know exactly what you're doing. The silence was absolute. This wasn't a comeback. It was an indictment. At the table. The other co-hosts of The View were no longer pretending this was manageable. One of them turned slightly toward the camera, shaking her head almost imperceptibly. Another repeatedly tapped her cue cards, a silent signal of distress. Someone off-screen could be seen frantically waving clear instructions to cut to commercial, but the cameras kept rolling. No music, no transition, no escape. This was reality television at its most raw and unfiltered, stripped of polish and control. Everyone in the studio knew it. This wasn't just an uncomfortable moment, it was history unfolding in real time, the kind of moment that would be clipped, replayed, dissected, and debated for years. Joy's face was flushed now, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her jaw clenched as she struggled to contain herself. The power dynamic had shifted, and she felt it. For the first time since the interview began, she wasn't in control of the room, and then she stood up. The scrape of her chair echoed unnaturally loud in the silent studio. Gasps rippled through the audience as Joy pushed herself to her feet. Her hands braced against the table. Standing changed everything. It broke the last illusion of a moderated discussion. This was no longer host and guest. This was confrontation, unfiltered and unpredictable. Do you have any idea? Joy began, her voice shaking with rage. How offensive it is to sit there and lecture me about morality. Producers were now fully visible at the edge of the set, whispering urgently into headsets. A stage manager raised both hands, signalling again for a break. Still, nothing happened. The red light on the camera stayed on. Mark didn't stand. He didn't need to. He remained seated, grounded, unflinching, looking up at Joy with an expression that held neither fear nor apology. This isn't about me lecturing you, he said calmly. It's about you confusing cruelty with courage. That line landed like ATHUNDERCLAP. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but for the first time, no words came out. The audience, sensing the magnitude of what they were witnessing, remained eerily silent. Not a cough, Not a whisper. This was the breaking point. An interview that had started as routine promotion had transformed into a moral battlefield, one side wielding accusation, the other demanding fairness and humanity. No producers, no hosts, no audience. Reactions could stop what had already happened. Whatever came next, security stepping in. A walk-off? A commercial cut? It was already too late. This moment was burned into television history. And everyone in that studio knew it.